The Open Heart. At 21, I loved you more than I will say. At 31, I seemed to be dying every day. Tracked you down in Rome's back streets, desperate for a glance. Trapped you up where Tiber meets the bacchanalian dance. Somewhere down in old Marseille, we had it all to do. Couldn't quite explain a way two lovers could get through. Finally, in Winchester, we blew it all apart. As hidden passions fester, so does the open heart. Well, this will be very short. This is a poem I wrote about 20 years ago, no less than that, maybe 14 or 15 years ago. And it's very simple, it's short, it deals with traditional theme of poetry, love, mysterious love, neglected love. It was written at a time when I was writing regularly for a literary magazine, and I was needing to come up with a poem maybe once a week. So it wasn't something spontaneous that spilled out of me, as usually the best poems are. This is something which has some truth in it, has some emotional depth, but actually began as an intellectual exercise, perhaps. Not an intellectual exercise, but as something that needed to be written to a deadline. The first stanza, I don't know, I remember I was practicing with just writing anything for a first line and seeing how it developed. I wasn't interested in whether it was true or it was untrue, just something striking. There was the idea that if it came out, it was something that somehow would be relevant to me, at least subconsciously, psychologically. It would have some connection to my life. So I don't know, I was just trying to think of a good first line, and suddenly I came up with, at 21 I loved you. Well, of course I did love somebody at 21, but I think this is a very generic thing. It wasn't really talking about anyone in particular. So then I thought, well, what can I come up with next? At 21 I loved you. It seems a very simple little meter, simple words. At 21 I loved you. Simple iambic, tetrameter. I thought, okay, well, let's come up with a second line. So more than I will say. So the 8 syllables reduced to 6. Still iambic. At 21 I loved you more than I will say. So again, consciously it doesn't have any particular meaning for me. It's just something I'm trying to write. I'm just trying to write a poem and come up with something that seems coherent. And then I thought, well, try to rhyme, get 2 rhymes into each stanza. It's simple, so create some interest through the rhymes. At 21 I loved you more than I will say. At 31 I seemed to be dying every day. So just trying to really create questions in people's minds. So at 21 I loved you more than I will say. At 31, 10 years later, I seem to be dying every day. So is it the same person? Is it other experiences that has led to this feeling of dying every day? What does it mean, dying every day? Dying in what sense? You only die once, you can't die every day. So what is the writer referring to? I was very interested in this time at creating questions in the reader's mind. So I think that's what I was trying to do, really. Subconsciously, perhaps it had something to do with my life, but at least on a surface level, I was just really trying to create a memorable stanza, I think. So at the end of the first stanza I had the form. It was a very simple little poem, a simple little lyric about love with 2 rhymes in it. A quatrain would be made up of quatrains. There would be 8 syllables and 6 syllables, 8 syllables, 6 syllables in the 4 lines of the quatrain. So needed to continue now and give it some direction. So what could come next? I don't know. As a young man, I spent a long time actually, in Italy. So some of those, for some reason, the idea of these back streets, Rome's back streets, which can be a bit daunting, her kind of maze came into my mind. Tracked you down in Rome's back streets, desperate for a glance. So these days, perhaps would seem a bit odd actually to talk about tracking someone down and only wanting a glance. But again, I wasn't writing anything consciously about anybody, just some connections to my experience. You know, I did live in Italy for 6 years. I did know Rome. I had been in love at different times in Italy. And yeah, I had suffered sometimes for love, like most people do. So I tracked you down in Rome's back streets, desperate for a glance, in other words, not trying to get anything other than a look. And then tracked you out where Tiber meets a bacchanalian dance. So there is the idea that somehow things will be transformed into pure enjoyment. The bacchanalian dance, when the tracking down and the acceptance on both sides has been completed. Again, I'm not writing about any specific experience. It's just still trying to find a direction with the poem, really, and just trying to make lines that sound good, I think, most of the time, and any relevance it has to my life is totally subconscious. But I think that if there is strong emotion in it, there must be some kind of connection to the writer's life. So now I've got the idea, okay, so I've been in Rome, so maybe how can the poem continue? Can maybe continue with different places and talk about the same kind of thing in other contexts. So the next stanza continues, somewhere down in old Marseille, we had it all to do. Couldn't quite explain a way two lovers could get through. So now we've switched to Marseille, which is a place I've never been to actually, although it's in the south of France and not too far away from Italy. I know what Marseille has a reputation for, it being a very kind of a very kind of crime-ridden place, and probably find a lot of traveling people, unusual people with secrets to hide. It's quite romantic, quite mysterious. So suddenly a switch from Rome to Marseille. Again, I'm just trying to create memorable lines and stanzas here, really. Somewhere down in old Marseille we had it all to do, so there's a suggestion that somehow it's all moved on to Marseille. Couldn't quite explain a way two lovers could get through. It doesn't actually, I'm not sure what I'm talking about myself here, but I thought it sounded quite good. And like I said before, I assumed that must have. So at this stage, I was thinking that in terms of almost automatic writing, that if you just went with the flow, what came out would necessarily have some connection to your life and your deepest emotions. So perhaps it did and perhaps it didn't, I don't know. Other people will be the judge of that. I quite like it when I read it through, so at least in terms of the structure of the poem and what I was trying to do in creating random lines that sort of bisect, I think it kind of worked. So there's the idea that it's the same person, or is it different people? Is it kind of a metaphor for love as a whole, and looking at different relationships in different places, or is it the same relationship going through changes and moving in place and time? Is it just a big metaphor, or is it actually describing a particular experience? That is also a question I ask myself. But I would say it was a big metaphor, really. It's not specifically directed at any particular experience in my life. It's not about any particular experience in my life. And then the last stanza, finally in Winchester we blew it all apart. As hidden passions fester, so does the open heart. So again, just thinking about different places. Let's bring it back to England now. Well, that's where I come from. Although actually I've never been to Winchester, but I just had the idea of it just sounded good, and I could correlate it with blow it all apart. So you blew it all apart. So you had the double meaning of Winchester as a place and also as the Winchester rifle. Finally in Winchester we blew it all apart. And then how can I finish it after that? So the poem's called The Open Heart, so it's got to be something about an open heart. So as hidden passions fester, so does the open heart. So yeah, I can make the point that if you hide your emotion, you're going to suffer because of that. But if you show your emotion, often you're going to suffer as well. So that didn't seem to be a bad point to end on. I thought, as hidden passions fester, so does the open heart. So yeah, it was a poem which I wrote then when I didn't really have anything particular to say. I was just interested in the idea of automatic writing and believed that if you concentrated on the form, something would happen and something would come out which had relevance and depth of an emotional nature, psychological depth, and even if you didn't know it, it would mean something. I kind of see it, I think it works best if we look on it as a big metaphor about love. All of these things can or could be true. Love is often a struggle wherever it takes place, if it's in Winchester or Marseille or Rome or anywhere else. And the end of a love affair is often similar the world over. So yeah, I would see it as a big metaphor. I think that's how it works best, but perhaps there is some direct relevance to my life if the idea I had at the time of automatic writing bringing out something deep and emotional in the writer was true, and I think it probably was. There are different ways to write poems. You can have a very clear idea and sit down and write it, or you can be very indirect and very unsure perhaps about what you say, and sometimes then the best thing you can do is just let the images and the pen flow and see what comes out. And that's what I was doing here, and yet I gave it a very tight structure, so I knew what it would be. It would be 4 or 5 simple quatrains with 2 rhymes in each quatrain, and I just tried to keep the lines and the ideas and the words and the images interesting, and perhaps based on that some true things about my own life did come out, but if so, I'm not entirely sure what they are. However, the important thing is if it's any good or not as a poem. So let me finish by just reading it one more time. At 21, I loved you more than I will say. At 31, I seemed to be dying every day. Tracked you down in Rome's back streets, desperate for a glance. Trapped you out where Tiber meets the bacchanalian dance. Somewhere down in old Marseille, we had it all to do. Couldn't quite explain a way 2 lovers could get through. Finally, in Winchester, we blew it all apart. As hidden passions fester, so does the open heart.